In colonial Virginia, a world of tobacco, timber, and tradition was taking shape, a world caught between empires, old loyalties, and new possibilities. It was into this world, on February 22, 1732, that George Washington was born. His family were landowners, respectable but not aristocratic. Understanding that status in Virginia was measured in acres, connections, and reputation. George was born into a society built on a fundamental contradiction. The gentry spoke of liberty while their prosperity was built on the foundation of enslaved labor. This is a truth we must hold. Washington would become a champion of liberty, but he would also become one of Virginia's largest enslavers. When George was just 11, his father died, reshaping his future. He wouldn't get a fine English education. Instead, his schooling was practical: reading, writing, and surveying. For a teenager in Virginia, surveying was a path to the frontier and to profit. It was a skill that taught him to see land not as wilderness, but as future property. His half-brother Lawrence provided a crucial connection, introducing him to the powerful Fairfax family. This opened doors, leading to surveying expeditions into the Shenandoah Valley. Here, on the Appalachian frontier, George learned the harsh rhythms of travel and encountered the contested nature of the land. It wasn't empty. It was home to native nations, a political landscape of alliances and boundaries. By the 1750s, Britain and France were locked in a rivalry for North America, with the Ohio Valley as the prize. Young, ambitious, and connected, Washington was drawn into this imperial contest. He wanted a military commission, honor, and land. When Virginia as governor needed someone to deliver a message to the French in the Ohio country, demanding they withdraw, he chose the 21-year-old George Washington. In late 1753, Washington set out into the winter wilderness. The journey was perilous, but he succeeded, delivering the message and returning with vital intelligence. His published report made him known beyond Virginia, his first taste of public reputation. Diplomacy soon gave way to force. Washington was sent back toward the Ohio with militia troops, but the French had already built Fort Duquesne. In May 1754, a skirmish in the woods, the Jumonville Affair, marked the first violent clash of empires bearing Washington's name. Afterward, he built a crude defense called Fort Necessity. It lived up to its name. Overwhelmed by French and native forces, Washington was forced to surrender, signing a document in French that seemed to admit fault for an assassination. It was a humiliating defeat, but it didn't end his career. The larger conflict exploded into the French and Indian War. In 1755, Washington joined British General Edward Braddock's expedition to seize Fort Duquesne. The campaign was a disaster. Ambushed near the Monongahela River, Braddock's army was routed. But in the chaos, Washington showed incredible courage, riding through the fire, organizing the retreat. 2 horses were shot from under him, bullets tore his coat, yet he was unharmed. He emerged a hero from a catastrophic defeat. Appointed commander of Virginia's forces, he spent years defending a vast, vulnerable frontier. It was an impossible job, teaching him administration, logistics, and political frustration lessons that would prove vital later. In 1758, a new British campaign finally took Fort Duquesne. Soon after, Washington resigned his commission. He returned to civilian life, marrying the wealthy widow Martha Dandridge Custis. This marriage elevated his social and financial standing, and he focused on expanding his Mount Vernon estate. He became an ambitious, meticulous planter, but his efficiency and wealth were inseparable from the enslaved people whose labor made it all possible. As the 1760s unfolded, Britain, deep in debt from the war, began imposing taxes like the Stamp Act on the colonies. Washington, initially a loyal subject, felt the sting. He wasn't a fiery radical, but he joined other Virginians like Patrick Henry and George Mason in the House of Burgesses. His influence was quiet but steady. As tensions mounted through the 1770s, from the Boston Tea Party to the Intolerable Acts, Washington's measured stance hardened. He began to speak of American rights and British threats to liberty. The practical surveyor, the defeated officer, the determined planter was slowly, steadily, becoming the revolutionary leader America would need. In the annals of history, few names resonate as powerfully as George Washington. He wasn't just a president. He was the indispensable man, the steady hand that guided a fledgling nation through the storm of revolution. But who was the man behind the myth? Let's journey back to the 18th century and uncover the story of the general who forged a country. Born in 1732 in colonial Virginia, George Washington grew up a land surveyor and farmer. His early military career during the French and Indian War was a mixed bag of triumphs and defeats, but it taught him invaluable lessons about leadership, strategy, and the harsh realities of warfare. He learned how to command, how to inspire, and most importantly, how to persevere against overwhelming odds. These experiences would prove crucial in the years to come. By 1775, tensions between the 13 American colonies and Great Britain had reached a boiling point. The colonists, fed up with taxation without representation, were on the brink of open rebellion. When the Second Continental Congress convened, they faced a monumental task: choosing a commander-in-chief for their newly formed Continental Army. The choice fell on a tall, imposing Virginian, George Washington. He accepted the position with humility, knowing the immense challenge that lay ahead. He was to face the most powerful military force on earth. The early years of the American Revolution were bleak. The Continental Army was a ragtag collection of farmers, merchants, and volunteers, poorly equipped and often unpaid. They faced a professional British army, well-fed, well-trained, and seemingly invincible. Defeats at Long Island and the loss of New York City in 1776 brought the revolutionary cause to the edge of collapse. Morale was dangerously low. Many thought the war was already lost. But in the darkest of hours, Washington's leadership shone brightest. On a frigid Christmas night in 1776, he led his men on a daring and improbable mission. They crossed the treacherous, ice-choked Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on Hessian mercenaries stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. The victory was stunning. It was a much-needed shot in the arm for the American cause, a flicker of hope that reignited the spirit of the Revolution. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a profound psychological one. Yet, the hardships were far from over. The winter of 1777 at Valley Forge is a name etched in American memory as a symbol of sheer endurance. Washington's army, freezing and starving, was decimated by disease and desertion. While politicians debated and supplies dwindled, Washington remained with his men, sharing their suffering, holding the fragile army together through the force of his will alone. It was here, amidst the misery, that the Continental Army was forged into a more disciplined and resilient fighting force, thanks in part to the training of Baron von Steuben. Washington was not a flawless general. He lost more battles than he won. But his true genius lay not in battlefield tactics, but in grand strategy. He understood that he didn't need to destroy the British Army. He just needed to keep his own army alive. As long as the Continental Army existed, the revolution lived. He masterfully executed a war of attrition, wearing down the British resolve, turning what they expected to be a short police action into a long, costly, and unpopular war. The turning point came in 1781 with the help of a crucial ally, France. A combined force of American and French troops, under the command of Washington and General Rochambeau, trapped the British Army under Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. The French fleet blocked any escape by sea, and after a 3-week siege, Cornwallis was forced to surrender. The world watched in disbelief as the British Army band played. The world turned upside down. The fighting was effectively over. With the war won, Washington performed what might be his most remarkable act. At a time when victorious generals often seized power for themselves, Washington did the opposite. He resigned his commission and returned to his farm at Mount Vernon, willingly relinquishing command. This act cemented his legendary status, proving his commitment was not to personal power, but to the Republican ideals for which they had fought. He had won the war, and now he was giving the country back to the people. Of course, his service was not over. He was later called upon to preside over the Constitutional Convention and was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. He guided the nation through its fragile first years, setting precedents that would shape the presidency for centuries to come. He navigated political divisions, established a stable government, and warned against the dangers of partisan strife in his farewell address. George Washington's story is more than just a tale of battles and politics. It's a story of character, of resilience, and of unwavering commitment to the cause of liberty. He was a man who faced down the world's greatest superpower, endured unimaginable hardship, and ultimately gave birth to a nation. His legacy is not just carved in stone monuments, but is woven into the very fabric of the United States of America. Before the United States was a nation, before the stars and stripes flew, there was a man. Not a myth, not a legend carved in stone, but a man of flesh and blood whose ambition, discipline, and vision would forge a new world. This is the story of George Washington. Born in 1732 in colonial Virginia, George wasn't destined for greatness. He was a third son, with limited prospects for inheritance. His formal education ended around age 15, but what he lacked in schooling, he made up for in drive. He taught himself surveying, a crucial skill in a land where wealth was measured in acres. As a young surveyor venturing into the wild frontier, he learned the landscape, faced hardship, and developed a quiet, steely resolve. This early experience proved vital. When tensions flared between Britain and France in the Ohio Valley, a young, ambitious Major Washington was sent to deliver a message. This mission, though it ended in a tense standoff, was his first taste of military and diplomatic life. It ignited a spark. Soon after, he found himself in the midst of the French and Indian War. His early command was marked by a disastrous defeat at Fort Necessity, a humbling experience that taught him invaluable lessons about strategy, supply, and leadership. He didn't quit. He returned as a volunteer aide and survived the brutal Battle of the Monongahela, emerging as a hero in Virginia despite the British defeat. He learned to lead men through chaos, a skill that would define his future. After the war, Washington returned to his beloved Mount Vernon, transforming it into a thriving plantation. He married the wealthy widow Martha Dandridge Custis, becoming a stepfather and a prominent Virginian gentleman. For nearly 2 decades, He focused on agriculture, experimenting with new crops and techniques. He was a businessman, a landowner, and a member of Virginia's House of Burgesses. He was living the life of the colonial elite. But beneath the surface, discontent with British rule was simmering, and Washington, like many of his peers, felt the growing injustice of taxation without representation. When the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord, the Continental Congress needed a commander. They needed someone with military experience who could unite the disparate colonies. All eyes turned to the tall, imposing Virginian who had attended the Congress in his military uniform. Washington was the unanimous choice. He accepted the command, but humbly refused a salary, asking only that his expenses be covered. He knew the task was monumental. He was leading a ragtag army of farmers and merchants against the most powerful military on earth. The early years of the war were a relentless series of defeats and retreats. The disastrous Battle of Long Island nearly wiped out the Continental Army. Washington was forced to abandon New York City. Morale plummeted. Many believed the cause was lost. But Washington's true genius wasn't just in battlefield tactics. It was in his unshakable perseverance. He held the army together through sheer force of will. Then came the turning point. On a frigid Christmas night in 1776, Washington led his men across the icy Delaware River for a surprise attack on the Hessian forces at Trenton. It was an audacious gamble that paid off spectacularly. The victory, followed by another at Princeton, was a shot in the arm for the Revolution. It proved that the Americans could win and reignited the flame of hope across the colonies. Still, the hardships were far from over. The winter at Valley Forge was the Army's darkest hour. With little food, inadequate shelter, and rampant disease, thousands suffered. Washington shared their misery, lobbying Congress relentlessly for supplies and holding the starving, freezing army together with his steadfast presence. It was at Valley Forge that the Continental Army was forged into a more professional fighting force, thanks to the training of Baron von Steuben. They emerged a stronger, more disciplined army. With crucial help from the French, the tide began to turn. The final act came at Yorktown in 1781. Washington, in a brilliant joint operation with French forces, trapped the British Army under General Cornwallis. The siege was decisive. Cornwallis's surrender marked the end of major combat in the Revolutionary War. America had won its independence. With the war over, Washington did something truly revolutionary. At the height of his power and popularity, he resigned his commission and returned to Mount Vernon. This act stunned the world. In an age of kings and emperors, his voluntary surrender of power demonstrated his commitment to the Republican ideals they had fought for. He had no desire to be a king, but his country would call upon him one more time. The young nation was struggling under the weak Articles of Confederation. In 1787, Washington was called to preside over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. His presence lent legitimacy to the proceedings, and his quiet guidance helped the delegates navigate their heated debates to create the United States Constitution. Once the Constitution was ratified, there was only one choice for the nation's first president. Washington was elected unanimously twice. As president, he faced the immense task of turning the words of the Constitution into a functioning government. He established the first cabinet, created the National Bank, and navigated the treacherous waters of foreign policy, keeping the young nation out of European wars. He set precedents for the presidency that endure to this day. After 2 terms, he once again voluntarily stepped down. warning against political factions and foreign entanglements in his famous farewell address. George Washington returned to Mount Vernon for the last time, a private citizen once more. He died in 1799, leaving behind a legacy that is difficult to overstate. He was not a perfect man. He was a product of his time, a slaveholder whose views on slavery evolved, but never fully reconciled with the liberty he championed. Yet, his leadership was indispensable. He was the general who won the war, the president who launched the nation, and the citizen who put country before self. The father of his country. At the national level, the Constitution itself has embedded compromises over slavery, counting enslaved people for representation while denying them rights, protecting the slave trade for a period, and requiring the return of fugitive enslaved people. In 1793, the Fugitive Slave Act strengthens mechanisms to recapture runaways, reflecting the power of slaveholding interests in the new republic. Washington's administration is thus part of the system that sustains slavery, even as Washington privately begins to imagine a different and one he will only fully enact in his will by freeing those he personally owns upon Martha's death, while being unable to free others bound to the Custis estate. The Republic is being built with ideals in its mouth and chains in its hands, and Washington stands at the center of that contradiction. As Washington's first term proceeds, political factions harden into something resembling parties, even though many founders claim to despise parties as dangerous to Republican unity. Hamilton becomes the symbol of a strong central state, commercial development, and closer ties to Britain. Jefferson becomes the symbol of agrarian republicanism, suspicion of financial power, and sympathy for France. Newspapers attack. Accusations of monarchy and disloyalty fly. The tone is often vicious. Washington, who values unity above almost everything, finds factionalism deeply painful. He wants to stand above it, but he cannot. Each decision he makes is read as partisan, and each side tries to claim or condemn him. In 1792, Washington reluctantly agrees to a second term. He is exhausted by politics and longs for Mount Vernon. But he fears that leaving too soon could destabilize the government and invite crisis. His continued presence is seen as a national anchor. His second term is harder. International conflict pressures neutrality. Domestic politics become more toxic. Personal attacks intensify, even against Washington himself. He is accused of corruption, of betrayal of the Revolution, of being a tool of Hamilton or a covert monarchist, charges that sting because Washington has constructed his entire identity around public virtue and reputation. Yet he persists, focusing on what he believes to be his duty, to keep the Republic stable long enough to outlive him. By the mid-1790s, Washington has decided he will not serve a third term. This decision is another precedent. The presidency is not a lifetime office. Power will transfer. The Republic will be tested without him. In 1796, Washington prepares his farewell address, crafted with assistance from Hamilton and informed by years of frustration and concern. It warns against the dangers of faction, the temptation of foreign entanglements, and the regional divisions that could tear the nation apart. It emphasizes the value of union and the necessity of morality for Republican government. It is not scripture. It is counsel from a man who has seen how fragile the American experiment remains. When Washington steps down, the nation faces a test it has never faced. A change in leadership without revolution, without violence, without collapse. The transfer works. John Adams becomes president. Washington returns to Mount Vernon. Retirement, however, does not mean peace. The estate requires constant management. Visitors still arrive. The political world still intrudes. In 1798, as tensions with France escalate into the undeclared naval conflict known as the Quasi-War, Washington is called upon again. Adams nominates him as commander of a provisional army. Washington accepts, but he remains at Mount Vernon, insisting on certain conditions and leaving day-to-day organization largely to others. Even in near retirement, his name is a pillar the government leans on in crisis. In December 1799, Washington falls ill after riding in cold, wet weather. His condition worsens rapidly, likely an acute infection of the throat and airway. Medical treatments of the era, bleeding among them, offer little help and may worsen the outcome. He dies on December 14, 1799, at Mount Vernon at the age of 67. News spreads across the nation and beyond. Mourning becomes public ritual. Eulogies elevate him into something more than a man, into a symbol of the Revolution, the Republic, and the possibility of leadership restrained by principle. But symbols can simplify. The real Washington is more complicated than marble. He is a man of fierce self-control, hungry for honor and terrified of disgrace. He is a commander who loses more battles than he wins, yet wins the war by refusing to be destroyed and by learning how to hold a coalition together. He is a statesman who does not ride the most original political philosophy, yet anchors a new system through conduct and precedent. He is a president who expands federal authority when he believes survival requires it, while warning against the dangers of power. He is a slaveholder who comes to dislike slavery, yet lives most of his life benefiting from it, unable or unwilling to break fully from what made his world. His greatness, if it can be called that, lies partly in what he refuses to do. He refuses to seize power at the end of the war. He refuses to turn the presidency into monarchy. He refuses a third term. He refuses to let faction push him into open vengeance against opponents. Again and again, he chooses constraint, sometimes out of virtue, sometimes out of calculation, often out of both. And because he does, the American Republic survives its most vulnerable infancy. The United States that follows Washington will not always follow his warnings. Parties will grow stronger, not weaker. Foreign entanglements will come. Regional divisions will deepen. Slavery will expand, driving toward civil war. Native nations will face relentless dispossession. The country will build extraordinary wealth and commit extraordinary injustices, often at the same time. Yet Washington's era sets the basic frame: a president under a constitution, an army under civilian control, a nation that tries, however imperfectly, to bind power with law. In the years after his death, Washington's image is used by nearly everyone. Politicians invoke him to sanctify their arguments. Reformers claim his principles. Opponents of reform claim his caution. Slaveholders cite him as proof slavery can coexist with Republican greatness. Abolitionists cite his private doubts and his will as evidence that even the nation, as founding hero, saw slavery as wrong. The truth is that Washington belongs fully to no faction. He is too human, too contradictory, too shaped by his time, and too influential on what came after. He begins as a Virginia boy with limited formal education and enormous ambition. He becomes a surveyor measuring land that others already inhabit. He becomes a soldier whose early war includes mistakes that help ignite a global conflict. He becomes a planter whose success rests on enslaved labor. He becomes a revolutionary commander who holds an army together through defeats and hunger and political intrigue. He becomes a president who invents the practical meaning of executive power while trying to keep the nation from fracturing into rival camps. And in the end, he becomes an American myth, useful, inspiring, and dangerous if it obscures what his life actually shows. Because what Washington's life reveals, in its full complexity, is the nature of the country he helped create: ambitious, divided, idealistic, compromised, resilient, and always unfinished.